Thank you. I can't stand here without taking a moment that I invite you to share with me to just reflect on how lucky we are and about how important gratitude is and how we have so many things in our life to be grateful for. And one of the things I'm just really grateful for is Julie and her friendship and her support. So can I get a show of hands of people who every now and then, when they think about their life, they secretly kind of go, I kind of can't believe it, that this has turned into like my life, like, right? Like, wow, how did that happen? That I'm here with you with this life, right? And I should probably say at this point that I didn't actually intend Julie to put all 5 pages of my bio in the document that you guys all got. And those of you who actually made it all the way through, I want to say thank you, right? But one of the reasons that I have that reaction where I am like, I can't believe this is my life, is I actually grew up relatively poor, right? So my parents broke up when I was 13. I started working when I was 13 because I had to. And because I was working, I barely graduated high school. I graduated high school with a 1.2 GPA, and I think I only got the 0.2 because they just couldn't stand the thought of me being around for another year, right? and at that point, I was frying chicken at Chick-fil-A, and I was doing a good job at that, but I decided that's not all. Chick-fil-A is awesome, right? Right? Chick-fil-A, we believe in you, yeah. And so I joined the Navy, and because it was the only choice really I had, right, to change my life. And that was an amazing experience for me. I spent 7 years doing special operations with the Navy, doing all kinds of crazy stuff you'll have to get me drunk to talk about, which is an invitation. But it really did change my life. And coming out of that, many other great things happened. But when I look back on the things I've been able to do with my life, mostly because of luck, if I just right place, right time, it's really hard for me to think back to that kid in that mobile home where the fridge was falling through the floor who actually didn't have lunch money to where I got to today. And where many of you, and just listening to your stories over the past few days, have gotten to. And that's why I think this point of gratitude is so important. And one of the things that I think is so powerful are stories. And the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. So a funny thing about this kid who grew up in a mobile home is that my dad was born Dennis Lobkowitz. And the Lobkowitzes have been princes of Bohemia for the last 700 years. They were chancellors of the Holy Roman Empire, primary patrons of Beethoven, Mozart, and Haydn. They have an amazing collection. And growing up, I had these crazy aunties who would send me newspaper clippings and those kinds of things. And we're actually from what in our parlance from California, we would say is the white trash Tanya Harding branch of the family from Belarus, right? And when And so after I made partner at McKinsey, I happened to be in Prague, and I roped a friend with me, Mary Meany, and I was like, let's just walk up to the palace. So the Lobkowitzes have the only private residence in the Prague Castle complex, and just go meet them, right? And so I went rocking up, I knocked on the door, asked to see the guy, and I was like, hey, cuz. And they were, I tell the story that they were like, oh, actually the line for crazy people who think we're related is actually out the back door. Make sure you hit the gift shop on the way out. Bring something back to the cousins in California. But what actually happened is I reached out to them. I mean, I met them or whatever, and then I reached out to them afterwards and said, look, I know I'm from this way over thing. Who knows if it's the even same Lobkowitzes, right? But will you help me figure it out? And they were like, well, we'll try, but we don't really know. So we got to know each other. And as I got to know them, what I realized was this princely family who had, they lost everything under the Nazis. Has anybody seen the movie Monuments Men? In the salt mines in that movie, that's the Lobkowitz's art. And then they got it all back, and then they lost it all under the communists again, and they spent 25 years getting it all back. But this family, they live in a 200 square meter flat with their 3 kids, right? Like they are asset rich, and they are not cash rich. Right? And so as we got involved with that, I saw an opportunity to make a difference and to help them. And so I helped organize some pro bono support, which is how I met Juan Ma, right? So as part of that, we set up a governance council or committee, not committee, advisory committee. And Juan Ma, who is the managing director of the Salvador Dali Foundation, he manages the collection on behalf of the king, is also on that board. And I remember being in a Portuguese restaurant, in the basement of a Portuguese restaurant in Prague 3 years ago. And we were drunk. And I was like, we need to start a stock market for art. And William, the current prince's reaction was to turn to the proprietor and be like, no more wine for him, right? But afterwards, Juan Ma was like, it's a really good idea. It's a really good idea. And so what I want to do, if it's okay with you guys, is to take you through the idea, how it's evolved, where it's gotten to, and some of the very exciting things that are happening with us. And my ask, as these are all about learnings, right? So I'd really ask you guys to give me feedback individually, collectively, how we make it better, how we make it more compelling, how we make it more impactful. Okay, so I really am viewing this as a conversation with friends who are going to help us make it better. Okay, so art, right? So can I just some pop quizzes, because I know you guys don't like to ask questions. So because I'm sitting through all morning. What is the value of fine art in private homes in the world? The value, if you had to guess, what's that value? What's that number?
Several hundred billion.
Okay, that's not fair. Okay, so Sotheby's estimates that the value of private fine art is $2 trillion. $2 trillion. What do you think the value of fine art in institutions is?
Less than that. 1 trillion. Oh, God.
No. So as an example, there are 38 Caravaggios in the world. There are 5 in private hands.
Like 500 million.
It's multiples of the 2 trillion. The finest art in the world is in the institutions. And those institutions, like the Lobkowitz, and by the way, this is not a Lobkowitz project. The Lobkowitzes don't have, a seal of approval over all of this, that kind of stuff. I use that story because it really helped me become aware of how needed it is to create liquidity from assets. Now, in finance, we see people needing liquidity from assets all the time. And there are vehicles to do that, right? And so if I were to ask you, what is the fastest growing category in the art world today? Where's the fastest growth in terms of finance for art happening? Well, it's lending. It's lending against your art. So do you know what happens when you loan against your art? So the fine art lending market is about $400 billion. It's a $400 billion market. Goldman's in it. Bank of America alone has an $8 billion portfolio. If you want to loan against your art, what happens is that the institutions who will give you the money will give you 30 to 50% of the value of the art at 20 times the basis points you would pay for most other financial instruments, and then you have to pay it back. Which is why when Julie and I have been doing interviews, and Julie has been an amazing supporter of this, I'll get to that story in just a minute, when we talk to people in that market loaning, they say, honestly, 9 times out of 10, the art ends up having to be sold because they needed the money for a reason to begin with. So as you think about institutions and families and individuals and this multi-trillion-dollar asset class, Where today, they have two options. They can sell it. If you sell it through Sotheby's or Christie's, they will take 20 to 30%, sometimes on each side of the transaction. Juan Ma buys things in the open market, right, for the museum. 20 to 30% on each side of the transaction. Or you can take a loan where they're only going to give you 30 to 50% of the value. You're going to pay 20 times the basis points and you have to pay it back. We are hoping to create a third way. And, with some really great mentoring from John, we've really tried to think about this in a way that is a purpose-driven organization whose primary intent really is around creating a new economic model and a new ecosystem for art that fundamentally transforms the way art is supported and financed today. At the heart of that beneficial business model, just to give you a bit of a preview, is every time the stock is traded in our secondary market, and I'll talk about the difference between the primary and the secondary market, we require a 1.5% charitable donation to the institutions that hold it. So when we are at scale, and at scale is simply, let's say it's $1 trillion, I think we use 2 trillion. If we got 0.4% of the fine art out there on the exchange, we would give $2.4 billion a year to institutions and be the single largest benefactor of the arts in the history of our species. It's this power of thinking about how can we make a difference, not how much money can we make. When I first went to John with this model, it had amazing margins and amazing numbers. And he said, no. Our goal here is to really fundamentally change the way that art is financed and the architecture of the economics of this, we have to, no questions, be a much, much lower cost option for all parties involved. This can't be seen as a get-rich thing. So I'll take you in detail through the economics. I'll ask that you guys keep them confidential. But the economics, both for the institutions and for the organization, are compelling. But first, I'm going to step back and talk a little bit about why we're doing this now. There's several reasons, right? One is, 30% of all museums will never reopen because of COVID, right? Another reason is that there is a long-standing trend of desubsidization by governments of the arts. They just can't afford it. But the biggest reason is last Christmas, Julie came to spend Christmas with us. And I spent Christmas complaining about my job. And over a bottle of wine, she was like, Dennis, what are you doing? Julie came to Prague 6, 8, 10 years ago and toured everything. And she was like, oh my God, there's so much that could happen here. Why don't you go start your idea for a stock market for art? I'll help. And that's why we're here today. Because that's what she does. She brings people together to help. So let me just take you through a very fast tour of a little bit around the art market and the art world, and then why we're trying to do this. And again, the intent here is to give you guys enough ammunition to give me feedback, right? To give us feedback for what we're trying to do. So I'll skip through this. So the first of all is that art is already a savvy investment class, right? So, you can believe these numbers or not. These actually come from Credit Suisse, right? So on average, fine art. This is not speculative art. This is not new art. This is not NFTs. This is not blockchain. This is not boom chicka wow wow, whatever you want to call it, right? This is fine art, okay? Fine art appreciates about 9% a year. And you can say, okay, well, that's crazy. Okay, 5% a year as a stable asset class is really good. Ultra high net worth individuals allocate about 6% of their portfolio to art today. That's about twice what they allocate to gold, right? So it's already a savvy, solid investment class for people. The second is that people need help, right? That's why loaning against art is the fastest category in the art market. There is this massive distance between the art, which is very valuable but cash flow negative, right? You got to house it, you've got to restore it, you got to insure it, you got to protect it, right? It's kind of a pain in the butt. right? And it's expensive. And ticket sales don't make up for it in any institution. We talked about the lending of art. There's enormous demand. So can I just see a show of just informal? So there are, I said 5 Caravaggios in the world in private hands. The last one that sold was found in someone's attic. It sold for 170 million to the founder of Blackstone.
Whoa.
Yeah. If you could own a share in one of those Caravaggios, is there anybody here who'd be interested in owning a share in that? Can I just see a show of hands? Who would be? This is not unusual, right? We have multiple examples. So this picture here is the Bast de Mousquier. I'm sure I've massacred that in my bad California French, but it basically what happened is an online marketplace in Switzerland, as a gimmick, bought a Picasso and didn't advertise in advance. Just one day, as part of their listings, they said you can buy shares in this Picasso, which was set up as a charity, right? So it will never be sold at a profit. It's displayed in a museum. They sold 40,000 shares to 25,000 people in 48 hours, completely unannounced. There is massive demand for people to own art, to own the status of art. So Juan Ma has been an amazing advisor on this. And you know what when we were brainstorming around what's the return to people who buy these shares, you know, for most of history, the return has been status. People have not invested in art just because it's a good economic, it is a good economic investment, but people want to say, I own a piece of that Picasso. I own that thing. And often, actually what we're finding in the interviews that we're doing is people really like the idea that they could, own something that they don't have to have in their house, right? That they can just kind of do that. We're at and we see this in multiple other industries, right? MyRacehorse.com will let you buy shares in a racehorse, right? You've got places where, in New York, where you can buy shares in hip sneakers. Ooh, I definitely don't want to share that, right? I'm gonna start an underwear. No, so you know, it's a trend that we really see accelerating. It's kind of like crowdfunding. It's kind of like a lot of these things. They're a different and new way of participating in art. So another benefit here, and this is something that we have not yet achieved, but we see in other places, which is that when you move to fractional ownership, you introduce a fractionalization multiplier. So the easiest example of this is taking a big house and turning it into condos, right? If you added up the price per square foot, it's higher when it's condos because more people can afford, they can't afford the 2 million house, but they can afford the 250,000 condo. Where we have an example of this is there's a company called Masterworks in New York. They have a very different model. They take a very traditional hedge fund asset under management kind of 20% of the upside kind of model. There's no beneficial bonus model as part of their thing. But they bought a Banksy. They've done this with a few other times. They find like a Hockney with no naked dude, no swimming pool, and then they market the hell out of it, right? And they sell it at a profit. But the returns they're getting, their fractionalization multiplier, and when I say fractionalization multiplier, I mean above what we see happening in that category of art index, is 2.6. So let me give you an example. You have a Picasso. It's worth 5 million. You decide you're going to sell minority shares, so you keep the Picasso. You get a check for 2 million. The remaining value of that Picasso for you goes to 4.8, not 3, 4.8, because we're using a 1.6 multiplier here, very conservative. You then, if you're an institution, will get an ongoing annuity based on the shares trading. I'll go through this a few times because it's complicated, yeah? What we've tried to do is set up a model here so that we create a win for everybody, right? So if you're an art institution, you get the cash for the minority shares, you benefit from the asset appreciation, you receive, you know, charitable contributions that we talked about, and you're repositioning yourself to be as brokers for the private individuals who would come to you. No private person with a Picasso can come directly to us. You have to go through an institution like the Dali Foundation, like the Tate, like the Royal Academy, right? We'll create an Art 10K to create the provenance. This is a great idea we got from Malcolm, right? Because you really are going to need that kind of certificate that's going to give you the history and the provenance, which means that over time, we will be the ultimate repository, the ultimate catalog raisonné across categories of art. What we're doing here is talking about how multiple organizations are looking to divest or to diversify their portfolio into different things. What I hear from sovereign wealth funds and other things is, nothing really pays a dividend anymore, right? The asset classes we're getting today aren't giving us the return that we're looking for. What we heard yesterday from a deal is that, her clients really are looking to diversify their portfolio, and they're doing it where? And in what categories?
Equities, real estate, and art.
So this seems to be a bit of a perfect storm of multiple things coming together. I'm not going to go through this. Let me just walk you through the life cycle, and then I'll take you through the economics, and then I'll talk to, very confidentially, I'll ask, we'll turn the thing off. I'll talk to you about some things in our pipeline that we're very excited about. So the first is, a custodian decides to sell their share in their artwork, right? They can float any portion of the value of that artwork because we expect there to be M&A activity where things will change custody. For institutions, that probably won't be the case, but that could be the case. The ownership of the custodian can decouple ownership and custodianship, but we have to make that explicit. The custodians could potentially receive a cash advance, right? We can raise funds to do those things. The broker, they have to then go to a broker. The broker gets 5%, right, to do the provenance, to create the 10K. We get half of that at the Ikon Exchange. Once it's gone through with that Art 10K, it goes to our curation board. We then work with asset managers, private banks, investment banks, and other kinds of things to place the primary listing of the shares. Just like in anything else, you don't want to have something go to market and have it, deliveroo on you. What you want is something that's going to increase in value. So basically, we work with that category of asset managers to do the primary placement of those shares. When that happens, the investment placers get 1.5%, and in that first paid for by the buyer, the placers get 1.5%, and we, Ikon, get 1.5%. That then goes to the secondary market. In the secondary market, every time the stock is traded, Ikon gets 1.5%, and we require a 1.5% charitable donation to the hosting institution. Does that make sense? Yeah. Is that getting complicated? We think that the widening of the potential investor pool will drive asset value increasing. It's a simple, there's only 5 Caravaggios. There are X billion of people on the planet. That number of people wanting to participate will compete the price up over time. We think this has multiple benefits to the owners, the custodians, and the investors. Because it's a secondary market, and because we expect to be first mover to scale by working primarily with institutions, and I'll talk about that in a minute, we think it's going to be much easier to go institution down than private, individual, random, Banksy, whatever up. There will be enough liquidity that people can exit their investment anytime they want. Does that make any sense? You can sell those shares on. We walked through this about how if you had a 5 million painting, right, what you get is you get 2 million. If it goes 4.8, it continues to appreciate, and then you get an ongoing revenue stream as the stock is traded. We are not doing this on the blockchain. So we've had some very good counsel from the Financial Conduct Authority and other folks. This would not be classed as a security. There's no need to create a stock market type securitization type platform. This can be a marketplace. So our costs, what we are initially expecting, and they've modeled in here as if we were using stock exchange technology and partners, have gone down almost completely, because creating an app, as we all know, does not cost that much. Now, we're going to use best practice anti-money laundering technologies and approaches from other financial institutions, right? Because that is the big issue in these kinds of things. So we will be seen as the blue chip, totally above board, old school, not kind of, I don't quite understand it, how does that work kind of thing, right? And I think that's super important to the partners that we're going to be dealing with. We have an amazing team. So, John has been incredibly helpful to us, both in advice and in other ways. Juan Ma is on board with us. We just very luckily we have the former master of the Draper Company. So I don't know if you guys know about the guild system in the UK, but basically the Draper Company is the only guild that Her Majesty the Queen and Prince Charles are members of. And he has been able to connect us to the chairman of the London Stock Exchange, the Lord Mayor of the City of London, the leader of the House of Lords, and I'll come back to that in a minute, and several other people who've been incredibly helpful for us in this journey as it's evolved. Let me, so just from our own economics, it's funny, Julie, one of the people she introduced us to is one of the founders of a leading global private equity firm, and we talked to him last week. And what he said is, lots of people are trying to do this. They're coming at it from a technology angle as opposed to a regulatory and a relationships angle. And I think what you're doing is exactly and the only way to do it, and what you have can't be replicated, right? That access that you have, it would be very hard for somebody else to try to do. And because you're doing it in the UK, which is a big enough but also manageable enough network, then you have the best chance of actually getting to scale. And I'll give a few proof points on that in a minute. We expect to be cash flow positive by the fourth quarter 2022, based on a $3.5 million or pound investment. By 2025, we expect, if our modeling is correct, and I've got a little bit of experience modeling, we expect to be almost 200 million a year profitable. Using current multiples, that gives us a company with an enterprise value of about $3.2 billion.